Hello, this is Frank Falvey with Frank Presents, and today it's my honor and privilege to have John Deaton, candidate for the Republican nomination for the United States Senate.
Thank you, Frank.
Doesn't that sound great, John?
It sounds great, and it's my honor to be here with you, so thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to it.
John, tell me a little about yourself.
Well, I have a very unique life experience. I come from a single mother on welfare and food stamps, deadbeat dad who abandoned us, and I grew up in a place called Highland Park, Detroit, and if you look it up, you'll see that it's one of the top-ranked worst neighborhoods to live in all of America.
And it has been that way for quite a while.
For over 40 years. I'm 57 years old. And there was even a sign not too far from one of my childhood homes that says, "Enter at your own risk, police do not patrol this area." You'd be shocked that we're living in America if you were to go back and drive down the streets of where I grew up. It's pretty bad. I was the first person to graduate high school in my family. Everyone before me was a high school dropout because of the neighborhood. For example, Frank, the first day of high school, I had a .38 shoved in my mouth and the hammer cocked. And the next day, I was a high school dropout, as you can imagine, like everyone else. And, you know, I grew up in extreme poverty, born into intergenerational poverty. My mother had a sixth grade education and, like I said, on welfare and food stamps. In fact, a pivotal moment in my life was when I was 14. I was out of high school for like almost 4 months as a high school dropout, desperately wanting to graduate high school and go to college. And my mother caught me crying. And she said, "John, why are you so upset?" Actually, she called me John back then. "Why are you so upset?" And I said, "Mom, I want to graduate high school. I want to go to college." And she said, "Well, just do what your brother did and, you know, work till you're 17. I'll sign the papers and join the military." That's sort of like a poor kid's way out of poverty or out of the bad neighborhoods. And so I told her I didn't want to. I really wanted to go to college, and so I needed to graduate high school. And my mom, God bless her, she is my absolute hero. She put her arms around me and said, "I'm sorry, son, that's just not for people like us." And I explained to people that's what real, true intergenerational poverty does to people. It strips them of their ambition, their self-esteem, handcuffs the human spirit and the mind, if you will. And on that day at 14, I said, I'm going to break this cycle of poverty. And one day, if I'm a dad, I'll be a good dad, unlike mine. And that started my journey. I started 14-hour, 16-hour days, found a tiny Catholic high school in a place called Royal Oak, Michigan, and a principal named Terry Urquhart, God bless him. He gave me he felt pity for me, but Frankie made me earn it. He said, "Listen, the tuition's $1,400 a day. I'll cut it to $700, not $1,400 a year. I'll cut it to $700 a year, but you'll play 2 sports, you'll maintain a 3.5, and you'll be active in the church." And I got a job washing dishes and waiting tables after football and basketball practice, and paid my way through high school and then college and made it to Boston, New England School of Law. And that's where I went to law school and graduated from New England School of Law in Boston.
What college did you go to?
I went to Eastern Michigan University. It's down the street from University of Michigan in Ypsilanti. And I'll tell you, Frank, I had no connection to Massachusetts. Ended up having the greatest connection ultimately, but most of my life I didn't have a connection except for one thing. I was a huge Larry Bird fan. It's the truth, especially in Detroit. And I made my way here because of that. I said, well, I'm going to get out of Detroit. Let me go to Boston. I was praying that Larry Bird wouldn't retire my first year of law school, which was '92, but he did. So I never got to see him play in the Garden, which is something I look forward to. But lived in Roxbury my first year, East Boston my second, and Malden my third. And that connection I told you, I realized I'm going to be the American dream. I knew I was going to be a licensed lawyer here in Massachusetts. I knew eventually, because, you know, I feel I have some talent at this, and I'll couple it with my work ethic. I knew I'd be successful. So I really am the American dream, and I decided to join the military after all, and I joined the Marine Corps. And I got chosen by the Marine Corps. I tell everyone, the truth is I couldn't afford Harvard Law. Probably Frank couldn't have got in, to be honest. but I beat out Harvard Law, BC Law, BU Law, Suffolk Law, Northeastern.
Yale.
Well, just I was talking about Massachusetts law schools because they only had one slot for the 1994 Judge Advocate law contract for the Marine Corps, and students from all these Massachusetts schools were trying to get for it. A Few Good Men, it just came out in '92, so everybody wanted to be like a Judge Advocate, but I'm very proud the Marine Corps chose me to represent the Commonwealth, and I'm very happy. Now I want to represent the Commonwealth in the Senate now.
You don't, well, first of all, I gather that when you were in grammar school and junior high school, you were an outstanding student.
I was pretty good. You know, I was a pretty good student, no doubt about it. You know, my public education wasn't the best. I don't speak perfect English. You know, I think it's, even though I'm a law school graduate, because those early years I was in public schools of the real rough inner city. Couldn't get really a lot of quality teachers that would go teach in that, but I did well.
And why did someone point a gun at you, another student, and didn't want you to go to high school? I mean, what was the other student's perspective of why?
Well, it's a very impoverished neighborhood, and it was about 96% black population. I was one of the only white students in the neighborhood. From kindergarten to 8th grade, there were 3 white students. Racial tensions were very high because I was born in '67 during the race riots, and you know, there were cops that had executed young black men, and race was very bubbling over and very tense, and so that's part of it, but they did it, I mean, I'm sure that guy put a gun on many black students as well. It was just a very rough neighborhood. Highland Park High had the, I guess, designation of being one of the first high schools in America to have a metal detector at the entrance. Somehow that kid got the gun past the metal detector, but it was just a very violent, rough neighborhood. My mother was stabbed when I was 6, for example, in front
If I
of me.
recall right, after World War II, there were race riots in Detroit. Am I?
No, there were race riots in Detroit, and you know, the neighborhood that I grew up, Henry Ford had opened up in the '50s, or actually earlier than that, opened up the first assembly plant for the Model T in my neighborhood, long before I was born. But he closed that plant in 1959, and when he closed that plant, which basically everybody worked at that plant in that neighborhood. It went from 50,000 people to like 12,000, and people just moved out. My mother, unfortunately, didn't have the means to get us out of there, and so it was a pretty rough neighborhood.
So you graduated law school, and then you were in Massachusetts.
Yep.
Then what did you do?
Well, I went on active duty in the Marine Corps after law school.
As a judge advocate?
As a judge advocate. I went to Yuma, Arizona. It was my first duty station. I was the chief law enforcement officer, and I was a special assistant United States attorney. There's actually a picture of me. It was published in the Herald. I'm in camouflage uniform. I'm on active duty, and there's a big piles of heroin and marijuana packages on the desk because the cartels would use young Marines as mules to transport the narcotics or even people on the southern border. So I actually was fighting border issues in the 90s, dealing with the FBI, border security, Naval Criminal Investigative Service. 7 years of active duty doing that. I also taught.
7 years?
7 years. I taught at Naval War
What did you rise to?
I was selected for major, but I never pinned it on because I got hurt. Not in combat, but in a training exercise. I had a couple back surgeries, and the Marine Corps medically retired me as an 03, which is a captain, even though I had been selected to pin on the major.
Okay.
And so after I got medically retired, what I did is I became a lawyer here in the Commonwealth representing mesothelioma and lung cancer victims from asbestos. So I've been fighting major corporations and insurance companies for 22 years and representing, working families. We're talking, plumbers, pipe fitters, service members, engineers, electricians, bus drivers, truck drivers, auto mechanics.
Were you with the company that specializes? There's a law firm that has advertised for years on mesothelioma.
Yeah, no, they advertise, but what they do is they get the case and then they send it to a guy like me, right?
Okay.
I don't necessarily I didn't have the advertising budget to advertise, but they would send it to me and I would do the work, and of course they get share in the fee. So some of those, I don't have like a professional contractual relationship with any of those firms, but I have done business with those firms because they'll say, hey, John, will you take this mesothelioma person who worked at, say, Canal Electric or Brayton Point or Boston Edison
So
or
you
Quincy,
were in business
Florida,
for
Michigan.
yourself?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you run your own business, and
I do.
So
A small law firm.
Let's turn a minute now to your candidacy for the U.S. Senate.
Okay.
One of the things I always like to ask people, when you get elected, what chair or what committee do you want to be on?
That's a great question, and I haven't been asked that often, that's for sure. This may be the only second time that I've been asked it. And it's an important question. I have 3 committees in mind. My first one is Veterans Services, because I don't believe we treat our veterans the way they're supposed to be treated in this country. I'm a veteran, but...
You exclude Massachusetts in that statement, though, right?
Well, Massachusetts, no, no, I don't. Massachusetts, for example, if you look at the shelter crisis, combat vets or veterans, homeless don't get priority over anyone else. I think that they should get a priority over someone else. If you've served your country, I don't think that you should wait in line behind people who are just arriving to the country, even if they're good people. And so,
okay, so you want to be on the Veterans Committee.
I want to be on the Ethics Committee. I actually fought the United States government. I sued the government and I exposed huge conflicts of interest related to the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission, and it helped lead to an Inspector General investigation where, these conflicted regulators were sort of regulatory captured. They were being captured by special interest group. And I think we got to return to ethics in our government. You have,
What does the Ethics Committee do? I mean, what's their power? What's their main purpose?
The main purpose is really instituting transparency in our government, and I think we have a fundamental lack of transparency in our government. For example, I think that you shouldn't be allowed to trade stocks based on inside information that you've learned that the general public doesn't have. There were senators and congresspeople who were briefed on the COVID shutdown in February. Before it happened, they sold all their stocks because they knew the market would crash. I think that should be illegal, and I think that should be barred. Things of that nature.
Is the Ethics Committee, though, it's not just concerned with senators and congressmen, right?
Right. No, it's...
But is that part of its concern, or is there a special committee that does that?
No, there are different, like inspector generals, and there are special subcommittees on certain things. But the ethics committee basically is how do we institute policies that are going to improve our ethics, our conflicts of interest. We have people in government, like I was saying about the insider trading, that I believe are violating a statute, which is the financial conflict laws of America, 18 U.S.C. 208, to give you an example, which basically says you're not even allowed to have an appearance of impropriety. So it doesn't even have to be improper. You're not supposed to even make it appear. And the reason I think it's so important is the public has lost confidence in our agencies, in our elected leaders, and that's way.
And the third committee?
Would be the banking committee, which is Senator Warren sits on that. So I'm hoping to replace her in the Senate, and I'm hoping to replace her in the banking committee, because I think, Frank, she's the epitome of what's happened. 13 years ago, she went there promising to hold bankers accountable. She was outraged they didn't go to prison from the financial crisis. Well, 12 years later, guess who wrote her last bill? The banking industry. She couldn't beat them, so she joined them, and I think that what's happening in our banking industry, where you have so much power concentrated to 5 major banks, there needs to be better supervision and oversight, and I want to go there and do that.
What other differences do you see yourself and Elizabeth Warren having?
You know, that's a great question. When it comes to policy, I could name many things. You know, packing the Supreme Court, her position on Israel, her position on the border. But the fundamental difference between me and Senator Warren is our approach. She's great at fighting against things, fighting against people and issues. But Frank, that's not the same as fighting for things and issues or people. For example, she's great at fighting against the rich and the wealthy. But Frank, that's not the same as fighting for the poor and the middle class. So I think you can uplift people without tearing people down. I don't think you have to tear other Americans down to lift other Americans up. So I think my approach is just fundamentally more positive and uplifting.
That leads me right into my next question.
Okay.
Bus stations, train stations all over the United States are not handicapped accessible, all because of one federal law that they don't have to be handicapped accessible unless they spend a certain percentage in renovation. Would you actively fight to make an exception for train stations and bus stations that they all must become handicapped accessible?
Absolutely. I think that, you know, listen, when you look at the American Disabilities Act, it needs to be amended, and it also needs to be enforced. What you're seeing is you're having builders who will look at that percentage of rehabilitation or innovation and then intentionally, you know, stop so that they don't have to meet those requirements. It's freedom. You can't live in a free society, in a free America, if all your participants don't get to participate in activities, whether it's restaurants, whether it's federal buildings, whether it's any of those things. So yes, I'm someone who has fought for the underdog all my life. I've been fighting for asbestos victims for 22 years against corporations and insurance companies, and anyone that's an underdog who's being underrepresented is something that's going to appeal to just who I am as a person.
Let's go back to a statement that you inferred to Israel.
Mm-hmm.
What is your feeling about the state of Israel, the government, in particularly Netanyahu? How responsible have they been to carry out the war in Gaza? I mean, I believe something like 40,000 deaths have occurred. Yes, Israel experienced 2,000 or something. Terrible, awful invasion and killing in Israel.
Right.
But how do you see this, what Netanyahu calls a war against Israel? I mean, against
Right.
Gaza.
Well, here's the thing. We start off with the fact that Israel does have a right to defend itself. I think we all can agree that it has a right to defend itself. And I'm someone who's been trained and actually taught generals at Naval War College on the rules of engagement and making sure you comply with the rules of engagement. So I stand the fact that Israel has a right to defend itself. At the same time, if war crimes have been committed, they need to be fully prosecuted. And, you know, the problem we have is we don't want to equate Israel with Hamas, though. I think that that's a mistake. And I think Senator Warren equates Israel and Hamas. It's very difficult, Frank, to make peace when the charter of the Hamas organization says we will kill every Jew and we will destroy Israel. And so how do you make peace with a entity that says, no, we're going to kill you every time we can, and continues to violate the police? So, but that doesn't mean mistakes aren't being made. That doesn't mean that crimes against humanity should not be investigated and fully held accountable. And so I think that unfortunately in these situations, mistakes are made. I think Israel has made some mistakes. I don't believe they're committing genocide like some people believe. We can have that discussion, but that doesn't certainly mean that any type of war crime should not be fully held accountable. And I think the Prime Minister, shares a lot of responsibility, and I think that when this war is over, I personally wouldn't mind seeing new leadership.
Changing the subject to see how financially conservative you are.
Okay.
Would you do away with the penny because the cost of producing it is unbelievably high?
Sure. And listen, I'm someone, when I said to you that I sued the government, I've become known in the world of cryptocurrency because I sued the government because of overreach related to certain cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, Ethereum, XRP. We're headed toward a digital form of currency anyways. And it's kind of sad that when you have a new digital world that we have, that we're still messing with pennies. So I think that we're probably headed to some cashless society in the future. I don't know how far that is, whether that's 10 years from now or 20 years from now, but I think we could do away with the penny right now.
All right. What's the question that I haven't asked you that all the way driving here, I want him to ask me this question?
Basically why I got in this race, I committed my own funds to this race because I felt so, it's this compelled. When I was in the Marine Corps, law school in Boston, I felt compelled to join the Marine Corps because of what I was able to do in this country. I'm supposed to be in jail or I'm supposed to be dead according to where I was born and how I was raised. And I'm the American dream, and I see that dream dying. And I felt compelled because, Frank, when you look at what's wrong, America is in perpetual crises. You have illegal immigration that's out of control. You have a debt problem in this country, 35 trillion in debt, credit card debt over $1 trillion. 50% of Americans don't have $500 in case of an emergency. We have an opioid crisis. We have inflation, housing crisis, cost of living crisis, foreign wars sparking up everywhere. But the greatest crisis, Frank, is a crisis of leadership. You have career politicians like Elizabeth Warren, partisan people who have an agenda, who are loyal to a party, and they fuel division amongst us so that they can stay in power. And I think we need somebody who says, hey, I just want to go do the job. And someone who believes in term limits, who isn't going to be a career politician.
How long are you going to be a politician?
Well, I believe in term limits, so I believe you get 12 years, 2 terms as a senator, 6 terms as a congressman or woman. If you can't help bring change in more than a decade, maybe it's time to step aside and let someone with the skill set do it. So even if I'm not successful in implementing term limits, I won't run for a 3rd term. I'll sit back because I think that it's something that's really necessary, because it all becomes about staying in power. These individuals like Senator Warren, they get addicted to the power and they want to stay there and they want to control things. I just want to go do the job and come home and spend time with my family when I'm done.
John Deaton, I have that correct?
You do, sir.
How can people join your campaign, learn more about your campaign, contact you?
Thank you, Frank. It's JohnDeaton4Senate.com. So JohnDeaton DeatonForSenate.com. There's a volunteer button if you want to volunteer at the campaign. There's obviously donations that are accepted on that site. And listen, there's a lot of excitement. I'm getting more and more volunteers. The more they hear about this campaign and hear about the vision that I have, it's becoming a groundswell of excitement. And so I encourage people to go to it. JohnDeatonForSenate.com. Be a volunteer today.
Okay, do that once more to get to your website.
Okay, JohnDeatonForSenate.com.
One of the things I've kind of noticed is I don't see any political signs for anyone. Are we doing away with political signs in this campaign?
Well, right now we're in the Republican primary, which is September 3rd. So I should have said that too. On September 3rd, if you're an unenrolled voter or Republican voter, please vote and please vote for me, John Deaton. I have lots of signs, and I think it's the summer. So, you know, it's hard. I will admit, Frank, it's kind of hard sometimes in August to get people motivated about November. But I think that come early September, especially
September 3rd is the primary
right
here at the Franklin Gymnasium,
right,
from like 6 in the morning to 8 in the evening. You can start voting.
Yep.
In a couple of days.
No. There's already early voting going on with the ballot.
Already now.
Yes.
Yeah. So already now, and I don't know, the last date to register is still a couple of days away. I think
so. Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. Listen, you're right. It's the September 3rd's coming up, and it's going to be a marathon, a sprint marathon from September, the night of September 3rd to November 5th, when it's Elizabeth Warren versus John Deaton. But I'm confident. I really am. And if anybody wants a sign, they can get one from JohnDeatonForSenate.com.
But you do want even though you're going to win, you do want the people to go out and vote.
Absolutely. Absolutely. September 3rd or before is very important. And I think that if they look at this campaign, they'll see I'm a different kind of candidate. I'm not your typical candidate and someone who genuinely loves his country. I wouldn't be sitting here, Frank, if this wasn't the greatest country in the world.
Well, September 3rd happens to be my birthday, and I'm kind of along there. You can do me a great birthday gift by going out and voting on September 3rd.
That is a great
at the
gift.
Franklin Fieldhouse.
Yes.
John, it's a pure pleasure to have you. I look forward to you coming back after your win, and we can expand our conversation as to the difference between you and the current U.S. Senator.
I look forward, and I will be back after September 3rd, Frank, and we're gonna explore those differences, because there are many differences between me and Senator Warren.
Thank you.
Thank you,
John.
sir. I appreciate you.
You're welcome. Thank you for watching Frank Presents, and we look forward to any comments that you might have for the program. Thank you.
This program was made possible by your Franklin friends and neighbors, good folks just like you. Thanks for supporting Franklin TV. And thanks for watching.